Hello, so today we're going to be going over how to play forecast. This is going to be a guide more focused towards beginners with a framework on how you would want to play around level 8 comps or quote unquote fast 8 comps with a set 15 twist and some updates and some knowledge about how things work a little bit in set 15. If you like my content, please make sure to like and subscribe. We're actually very close to our RP giveaway, which would be a great thing for me because 10,000 subs, that's something I never really dreamed about getting. So if we get to that number, that would be amazing. And we're working on it for a while. If you like my content, like I said, we already do guide content every single day. Just a couple days ago, I did how to play reroll. So if you're a beginner player looking to get accustomed to different styles of gameplay, the how to play reroll guide, very similar to this one, will help you out a lot as well. Additionally, if you want to see gameplay from yours truly, filtered for some of the better games so you're not hearing me complain a lot like I do on stream, here's a couple of live VOD that I just basically post afterwards onto this channel. I'm going to link it in the description because it's a newer channel that I'm trying to grow as well, just to give you guys either daily VODs or I'm trying to do 2 times a day. So 2 times a day VODs, so you can check out some gameplay to go with the guide content that I do on this channel. But anyways, when should you be considering to play forecast? A lot of times the crux of playing around forecast is having good econ. Econ management is very important. You need to have a lot of gold because think about it. It's not like you're playing reroll and you're just rolling at a low level buying cheap units. You're buying forecasts. They cost a lot. That's 4. The highest amount of gold you can spend on a unit is 5. So forecasts are pretty expensive. And not only that, you have to have the econ in order to push levels. A lot of times you'll hear it as a fast 8 comp. Well, I just call them level 8 comps because I don't know, I feel it's confusing for beginners. But either way, the idea is that if you're playing around being level 8, you need to get to level 8 and have enough gold to buy your units and enough gold to roll to actually see the units in your shop. To do all of that, you need to start from the beginning with a good econ foundation. Additionally, strong openers or securing key items that you want to play around certain carries will obviously help you. Strong openers are generally good when you're playing around forecast because you can use it to tempo and then kind of bleed out or figure out what you're doing a little bit later. Having the early HP lead can also help you because you're going to spend so much time trying to greed your econ to get to level 8 that's having a strong opener can often put you in a good spot to make it to those high levels. Additionally, you have to be somewhat comfortable playing flexibly. Now, I put flexibly in quotes. TFT in the ancient times of yonder and yore and whatever used to be very flex focused, that you just hit units and you throw them together and you make a board. Things get a lot more optimized now. So a lot of times playing flexibly just means giving yourself an out, giving yourself 1 or 2 options that you kind of say, okay, I'm playing either this or this, and if I don't hit this, I play this, and if I hit that, I play that. You usually have to commit and dial into one particular comp, but there's still an element of stabilization and flexing around certain units within a comp, which we can talk about a little bit after with some examples. Additionally, you want to have a decent understanding of managing resources because, like I said, you need to have good econ, have good items, make sure that you actually are playing towards something that you can then have a win condition for. Something I like to talk about whenever I introduce these concepts or I talk about these guides is what I like to call TFT Success 101. This is my way of kind of breaking down the game into a basic, you need 2 out of 3 of these things in order to have a good time playing TFT. Typically, a good spot in TFT, you need 2 out of 3 things: money, board value, or HP. What do I mean by that? You either have to have a lot of econ, you have to have a board value, which means you converted that econ into being a strong board, or you have to have a lot of HP. And usually 2 out of these 3 things means that you have a good spot. So when you scout, when you look at other people's boards, when you see where are you relative to the lobby and your placement, a lot of times if you have 2 of these 3 things and you're doing that better than most players in the lobby, you're in a relatively good spot. And it comes to be really important when you're playing around forecast units, for example. A lot of, of course, there's exceptions to this. If you have augments that you're trying to lose streak with or traits you're trying to lose streak with, like Crystal Gambit, you're trading a lot of HP to have more econ because you're going to get a better cash out, which will then eventually make it to board value. By the end of the game, you really only need one thing, and that's board value. All your money should be spent on making your board the best board possible. All your HP should be spent either that you ended the game that you lost, or you're using that HP to convert it into board value. Greed, read your HP to give yourself more money, etc. But that's like the main thing. But usually throughout the game, you should always have around 2 of these 3 things to have a basically like an easy game and be in a quote-unquote high roller good spot. Now, why do you even want to play forecast? A lot of times, you know, what's the big deal? Why does everybody talk about these forecasts? Fast 8 this, fast 8 that, you know? It's the main thing is that it's usually considered to be the like default option. Obviously, forecast, they have a high cap. You're playing around expensive units, you have access to higher cost units. When you're rolling for forecast, sometimes you see 5 cost. Those are like the pinnacle of strength and power on a board. Additionally, you have flexible options because you're playing around units later in the game. You don't have to commit so early, right? If the game starts, you don't have to say to yourself, I'm playing this unit, and if anything happens, I play this unit, and then something bad happens and you lose the game for free. With forecast, there's still time for you to fix your game plan. There's times for you to make things better, and that's where flexibility comes in. There's time for you to react and fix things. Maybe you hit an augment that helps you do something else. Maybe you hit a really broken augment and you're like, oh, I can play that other comp now that I hit this broken augment. That's part of playing around forecast. It gives you the ability to react and play around your game. Now, obviously, if you don't want to do any of that, you just want to close your eyes and hard force the same thing every day, then that goes out the window, and then you should probably maybe just play like a reroll or something. But like, that's like the main idea a lot of times with forecast. But then the main reason, the one thing that I want to talk about is this quote-unquote default option, right? A lot of times when I talk about forecast, I treat them almost like the default of TFT, and that's how a lot of people kind of look at them. When you're playing around a forecast board, it's usually because you have to. Sometimes it is the strongest board, sometimes they're broken, like Sorks this patch if you're watching this right now, like at the start of the set. But a lot of times, you can't play other kind of comps unless you have a spot for them. For example, like, let's just consider, right, I want to play a reroll comp. Like, let's say I want to play Kale reroll. What do you need to play Kale reroll? That's right, guys. You need a Kale. That's the problem with reroll. A lot of times you need the copies of the units, or you need items for the units because you're committing to low cost units. Sometimes you can force into them if they're really broken, but assuming that TFT eventually, when it's patched, you know, if something's broken this patch, it's going to be patched next patch, right? So there are rerolls and stuff that are strong, but a lot of times you can't just open up a game and say, I'm gonna play X reroll comp. You need to have a spot for it, and if somebody's contesting you from a better spot, that's even worse. You can run into really bad problems really easily. So a lot of times what ends up happening is, if you don't have a reroll spot, you have to look down the list and say, okay, which of these fine young champions am I gonna be playing around? And that's usually what ends up happening with forecast. So it's a really essential skill, and I think it's really important, especially if you're trying to, like, you know, not one trick and play multiple comps throughout the set of TFT. These are things that are really important. One thing I also mentioned, I mentioned a lot of flexibility when I'm talking about forecast. I want to make this very clear. This is something that I see a lot of beginners talk about and a lot of beginners get wrong. They say, oh, I'm playing flexibly. I'll play anything that I hit. There will be any unit that I could find, and I'll put them on my board, and I will win because I am the maestro of whatever your rank is, right? That's not really what flex play is, right? When I'm talking about flex play, you're not flexing everything. You're flexing between 1, maybe 2 plans. That's it. You have to decide on what you're playing, roughly speaking, what items you're roughly gonna make that are good on 1 or 2 units. You want to decide your plan A and your plan B, and then later revise those decisions. If you end up hitting another unit, maybe you can play that unit. If you hit something else, maybe you can play something else. But usually you have to have 1 or 2 plans, and that's where the flex comes in. And that usually means that you're slamming items that make great uses of your components that allow you to do that flexibility. Right, obviously, next patch, I'll do a more detailed flex guide, but for right now, I'll give you an example here, right? Let's take some of the AP forecast carries. So with the AP forecast carries, obviously, Rise isn't that strong right now. I'm making this a little bit future-proof in case Rise gets buffed in a later patch or some of these other comps get nerfed, that they're all around the same level. But I'm just going to use this as all 3 of the carries. Right now, obviously, Karma is the strongest, and Yumi's like up there as well. But in general, let's think about what these units really want. Karma is a sorcerer. She gets infinite AP. So with Karma, a lot of times what you want is something to help her cast, which is usually like a Shojin. And then you want some means of scaling up her AP in a really meaningful way. So a lot of times, because she has a lot of AP, you want to give her crit. and damage amp. So a lot of times the best karma items is something like this. This is a really good karma build because she gets a bunch of AP from sorcerers. Then you take the crit, you make her ult crit, and you get damage amp with the striker's flail. Now let's think about Yuumi. If you were watching my content yesterday, I made a Battle Academia video. I recommend checking it out because some of the stuff that I'm talking about here is also going to be covered there. But if you're ever playing around Yuumi, something that's really cool is that Yuumi can flex between a couple of different types of builds pretty efficiently right now. Obviously there's some that are a little bit better than others, but just speaking to it, right, Yuumi a lot of times, because she scales really well late into a fight, usually want to make something like an Archangels. That actually can work really well on her because she scales her pages, which do a bunch of AP damage, and then she doesn't have a means of getting AP in other ways because she's not like a sorcerer or anything like that. So giving her Archangels actually gives her a bunch of AP, which then makes all her pages hit like a truck. So by the time she scales up her pages, you basically scale up twice with something like an Archangels. Additionally, you can also go for full damage or upfront damage, excuse me. And a lot of times that's just a similar way of sorts, right? You just go the JG strikers, right? Just get the crits off, make her ult do a lot of damage via the means of just guaranteed crits with a lot of damage amp. You can mix and match these as well, and you can put them together. But one thing that's really important about Yuumi is that she does not want a Shojin, right? Both of these builds are builds that are trying to give you a lot of damage. And often, one of the better builds is just to put everything on her and just have scaling AP plus the crit plus the damage amp, right? But she's pretty flexible in terms of what you can make. What you don't want to make is a Shojin on her, right? It's like, because she has Prodigy, she generates the AP anyways. Now, let's talk about Rise, right? Rise, again, like the others, is a little bit specific, kind of like Karma. Rise, you don't want to build JG because Rise is an Executioner, which means he gets the crit anyways from the Executioner. So JG, or Jewel Gauntlet, excuse me, for the beginners, is not going to be a good item on him. So a lot of times with Rise, his best build is something like, you know, Archangels to give him the AP and this, and he gets mana generation from his mentor bonus, so you don't even want to play mana generation on him. But as you can see, there is like a little bit of a Venn diagram here around this Yuumi. Karma, obviously you need mana generation or else she doesn't cast her ult, so you can't build her without mana gen, so Shojin's really important here. Yuumi, you have other items, and then Rise, you have items like, you know, the base AP, not crit, right? So a lot of times when you're trying to flex, this is what I mean by having a plan A, plan B. Based on whatever item you make, you have to decide what are my plan A and my plan B. So for example, let's say I'm sitting here in the middle of my game and I'm saying, what item should I make? Obviously this is like, you know, flex play light. I'm going to do a better version of this in a different video. But just for sake of this being a really important concept around forecast, I can decide to make different items. Let's say I see a lot of people are playing Shojins. You know, in a good lobby where players are making logical decisions, this usually is an indicator that they're probably playing around like a Karma, for example, if they're playing AP with a Shojin, because Yuumi doesn't like Shojin and Rise doesn't like Shojin. So if I'm sitting here and I'm saying, well, what do I have a good spot for? It's like I could try and play around Karma as well, but with these items, like if I have these components, it's going to be a little bit hard, right? I'm a little bit far away. I need a lot of extra components in order to make my Karma items, right? I need the sword, I need the glove. It's a little bit hard. What I could do is I could just commit to something like playing Yuumi. That's like an idea of like committing early. And then obviously if Rise was really good, he's not that good, so you usually just have to play Yuumi from this point. But if Rise was a little bit better, I would also say, okay, I'm playing around either Yuumi with the Archangels or Rise with the Archangels. Similarly, if the roles were reversed and you saw a bunch of people with Archangels, you can make a Shojin and say, I'm going to play around this Karma, around the Shojin. A better option on a lot of cases, what I would say, let's say you want to flex between Karma and Yuumi, for example. Something that really is helpful is making a Jewel Gauntlet, right? Like if you have your early game unit, a good item to make in a lot of these cases is Jewel Gauntlet because it works well on both these units, right? That's like the common denominator here, and then like a lot of times the common denominator on the other side is like, you know, Archangels or something like that, and you have like your fringe examples, whatever. But that's just like an idea of what I mean by flex play and having a plan A, plan B. As you can see, I'm not saying, oh, I'll just play anything that I hit, whatever it is. It's like, no, you want to optimize your line for whatever is best on those particular units, and maybe keep one or two options open and kind of just find like the two units that can use a similar item, whether it be AP or AD. But anyways, now we're gonna get through the actual like frameworked guide. I know it took a little bit of time, but I want to talk about the pivot options and all of that a little bit earlier. So with this forecast game plan, what we're going to talk about is during each stage, what the general ideas that you should have are, and basically similar to like the reroll guide that I put out. You can basically screenshot the slides at the end of each stage, and then you have like a little bit of like a framework for yourself on what you want to do if you're playing around forecasts. But let's start. So stage 2 leading up to Krugs. You have a little cute little picture of the Krugs there. Obviously, like they're not actually Krugs anymore. They changed them to be thematic for the set. But this is like the core, like what it usually is. It's usually Krugs, Wolves, Raptors, and Dragon. These are the neutral rounds, like at the end of the stage. They usually have like the same little icon if you look at the top of the stage counter. But anyways, from stage 2 to Krugs, ideally, you want to slam items. This is your stage 2, so you're really early on in the game. Something that's really important is that you want to pick either an Econ augment or some sort of augment that gives you a lot of strength. When you're playing around forecast, you either want to be winning rounds and preserving HP, which then winning rounds also generates you Econ by the means of winning rounds, or you want to take an early Econ augment. This is usually very important. Early Econ augment, get your interest intervals going, get the gold, because once you have interest, you're basically earning money every single round via the interest. And then you can use that to push levels. You need to have a lot of gold early. It's super important. So you usually want to have an early econ, establish yourself to have like a bank that basically is like churning, giving you money every single turn, or you want to have something that's strong so you can preserve the HP, one or the other. Usually if you take something that's like, you know, a little bit like hopium, or it's like, you know, a little bit in between, it can be a little bit more awkward to basically make it to that final goal, because a lot of this starts on stage 2. A lot of your how well your game goes, if you're playing around forecast, it starts with your stage 2. Ideally, you want to streak as well. Streak, basically if you win or you lose a couple rounds in a row, up to like 6 or whatever, you get extra gold as a bonus. It's part of like the balancing of the game, right? Like, you know, win streakers get gold, and then lose streakers get gold as well, and allows you to like come back and have like a good comeback mechanic, so to speak. So a lot of times that means that you're either playing your strongest board or you're playing a weak board in order to make sure that you're getting at least as good a chance as you can in order to have econ generation by means of streaking. Now, I say try to, right? Don't force it, right? Like, don't purposely sell your board of upgraded units to make sure that you lose streak. I think that's a little bit degenerate. And in the same way, don't just like, you know, spend all your gold and roll and level just to try and win streak. Just try your best, right? If you have a strong opener, aim for the win streak. If you have a weak opener, aim for the lose streak, right? And use that dictated by how many upgrades you have and stuff like that. Ideally, like I said, on stage 2, you're prioritizing econ. Make 10, make 20, make 30. Rushing to 30 is really important because 30 gold makes it really easy to get to 50 gold. Basically, for every 10 gold that you have in your bank, you get +1 interest up to a total of 50, which gives you +5 gold per round. That 5 gold per round is really important in order for you to actually hit your final board later. You need as much gold as possible, so making sure that you're making econ intervals is extremely important. If you have to sell something to make the econ interval, I would recommend always considering to do that, because it is really important. So you want to speed run to get to 50. So 10, 20, 30, and then of course once you're at 30, you get 5 gold per round. Plus you get the 3 gold of interest. It makes it really easy to get to 40, which then is easy to get to 50. Technically the number is 32, but like, let's not get into the weeds of things. Just prioritize trying to make econ interval every single round if you can. Ideally, by the end of stage 2, you want to be 40 plus gold at Krugs. If you're not 40 plus gold at Krugs, you're going to be in an awkward spot, and it could go downhill really fast. 40 gold at Krugs is like a bare minimum in my opinion, so you want to be like that. Or if you're win streaking, it can make sense to be a little bit lower because you might have invested some gold in upgrades and maybe pushing levels and stuff like that. So ideally, one of these two things means that you're in an okay spot from my understanding. Next, let's talk about our forecast game plan. Wolves, stage 3. So now we've beaten our Krugs, we got some items. What are we doing? We're slamming items, and we're picking a strong augment. You can sometimes wait till the augment. The augment round is going to be on 3-2. So you can basically wait on 3-1, see what you get on your augment on 3-2, and then commit. When you pick your augment on 3-2, So this is right at the start of stage 3, right? Sorry, I'm gonna rewrite that. It looks really messy. Right at 3, 2, what are you gonna do? You finalize your decision. A lot of times when I say finalize your decision, it doesn't mean you have to know exactly the comp that you're playing, exactly the units, exactly the board. A lot of times it's decide, are you playing AP, are you playing AD, and what is your plan A, what is your plan B, right? We talked about it a little bit with AP already. I gave you like a little bit of like, sorry, let me find it, a little bit of a tip. Where is it? It's somewhere here, right? A little bit of a tip, right? This is what I mean. Like if you're in your early rounds, excuse me, here we go. If you're in your early rounds, this is what you would do at the start of stage 3. If you didn't already do it in stage 2, you're deciding, am I slamming my archangels? Am I playing around these components? Am I committing to sorks? Am I committing to what? And then based on those items, what are my plan A? What is my plan B? Sometimes you don't have a plan B. That's like a little bit awkward. But if you're playing around forecast, I always say to everybody, always try and have a plan A and at least a plan B, just in case, like, you know, it's giga contested, so you're not completely just like dead in the water. Try and have like 2 lines or 2 options that you can maybe consider. So that's what I mean. Make items that make sense. Pick items that can be shared across multiple units, across multiple boards, because then you can have your plan A and your plan B, right? If you just make a Shojin, you know for a fact it's Karma or it's nothing, and that's fine. If you have a good spot for it, if you think that you can be the Karma player that hits, go for it. I do this all the time. It really depends on your spot. But if you're trying to keep some options open, there's other options there as well. Or if you're just like, you know, Yumi or Bust, you can also do that. You know what I mean? But either way, finalize your decision. Then you want to stabilize if possible. Sometimes people roll a little bit on 3-2. Usually on 3-2 you level, a lot of times it's like you go to level 6 and then you roll like once or twice to try and find some upgrades. It depends on how much econ you have and what everybody else in the lobby is doing. When I say stabilize, a lot of times you're just trying to make it so that you can preserve health and econ, right? Preserving health is really important. You don't want to just be dead before the game even starts. You want to have a little bit of HP to work with. And then obviously with econ, you want to have the maximum econ. Keep those interest intervals and try not to break those interest intervals. By the end of stage 3, you want to be level 7, 50 plus gold at Wolves. If you're not level 7, 50 plus gold at Wolves, you're probably in a bad spot. I'm not going to lie, you're going to have to hope for a high roll. It's very rare that I see people be less than 50 gold, level 7 on Krugs. Now, you don't have to push to level 7, by the way, if you're not 50 gold. What I'm saying is, like, if you're able to, you should be level 7, 50 plus gold. If you're level 6 with less gold, I don't know what to tell you. It's probably like something went wrong in your stage 2 or your stage 3, or you got really unlucky with augments, you didn't get an econ augment, or you got really unlucky that the game didn't give you gold on like some of the neutral rounds because there's a little bit of RNG there. Of course, things can happen, things can go wrong, but just always keep that in mind. That's like a good indicator of, okay, I feel like I'm comfortable in my spot right now. Now, we got to the end of stage 3. Now we're on stage 4. Stage 4 up until Raptors, which is the next neutral round that we're going to hit. On stage 4, you are ideally 4-1 or 4-2, level 8 with 30 plus gold. The only time you should be leveling on 4-1 is if you are rich and contested. So you have to have an insane amount of gold, maybe even more than 30 plus gold. The reason is that XP in TFT is bought in intervals of 4 gold. Right? You could buy 4 XP at a time. 4-2 is what is called a perfect interval. What does that mean? It means that when you buy the EXP in groups of 4, it lands exactly on a number, right? It lands exactly on a perfect number. That's usually the case unless you have some sort of augment that skews it. 4-1 is what is called an off interval or imperfect interval. What happens if you level on this interval, you're basically going to be like, your XP gauge is going to be like plus 2 gold, like filled over onto the next level. And this 2 gold, that's like a free shop reroll. That's like that's gold that is basically wasted, because if you stay on level 8 for the rest of the game, that gold is gold that you're never going to get back. So the only time you want to level on 4-1 is if you're trying to beat other people and roll before them because you're contested, or if you're so exceptionally rich that you're just like, yep, I can just do this because I got it like that. You know, just let it make it rain and just like hit all your board early instead. That's usually what ends up happening. But typically, I would say like 90% of your games, you're leveling to level 8 on 4-2. That's just how it is. Make sure to keep that in mind. 4-2, big important number. Ideally, you want to be 4-2 with 50 plus gold. 50 plus gold is essential for a roll down. The odds are not in your favor if you're rolling with less than 50 gold. If you are low HP, you want to have way more gold than 50 as well. It is a bare minimum. If you are not managing your gold, that is something you have to work on as a player. That is like one of the first things you should start to try and like improve on, right? Always, if you're playing around a 4-cost board, 50 gold, 4-2. That is the goal. If you're not able to get to 4-2 with 50 gold, something went wrong along the way. You either held on to too many units, or you got really unlucky with augments, or you made a wrong choice on augments, you didn't take econ early, or like, you know, it could be RNG. Things could go wrong sometimes. I'm not gonna pretend like, I'm not gonna say it's all your fault. Of course, TFT has variance, but most of the time, this is what you need to do, and a lot of it is working your way up there. I'm gonna make an econ guide, by the way. Econ guide on Saturday. Put in your calendars. Econ guide on Saturday if you want to know some tips and tricks to make all the econ. I wanted to do it earlier, but then I decided to do this one first. Then when you're on 4-2, you want to roll down your gold. How much you roll is up to your spot. If you are really healthy, right? If you are healthy, you can stay above 30 gold. If you are, if you are not healthy, then you want to just go to 0, right? 30 plus gold makes it easy for you to reestablish your econ, because 30 gets back to 40, gets back to 50. So it just keeps your options open of like reestablishing your interest very easily, like we were talking about before. But if you're not healthy, don't sit there holding on to 30 gold like a dumbass, right? You're gonna lose the game, right? We're not trying to lose the game, right? I'm trying to help you guys win the game. That's the whole point of why you're watching this video. So if you're losing and you don't have a lot of HP, roll your gold. Roll down to 0 if you have to. You gotta try and hit your units, right? You gotta try and find the 4 costs. And then here I also say buy all viable 4 costs. I talked about it a little bit in the Battle Academia video yesterday, but it's understanding which 4 costs can actually be played on your particular board. So for example, we're talking about a Battle Academia board. Typically, it looks something like this. You usually want to play around Leona 2-star with your Yumi 2-star, but additionally, you want to play like an extra unit like Cassante, who helps out your whole board. Now, Cassante obviously is a really strong frontline unit, but something I talked about before on my previous video is that this is just really good because of the Protector synergy with Rakan and the Cassante. Equivalently, you can replace these units with another viable unit, right? You can play Poppy. Now, Poppy obviously isn't going to be the greatest unit here, of course, but she does have some synergy because she actually is a Star Guardian, so you get a little bit of a bonus on her. She's actually not that bad as a frontline unit in this particular setup because you're playing Prodigy, which includes some of the Star Guardians. And then if you need to, you have Jace. Jace is heavyweight, so you have the synergy with Poppy as well. It's not a popular variation of this comp, but this is what I mean by buying viable options. This could be the difference between you winning and losing rounds. If you're in dire straits, if you're low HP, you can spend some gold on these Poppies because they will help you to stabilize a little bit and not necessarily just like instantly die because you didn't hit your Leona. Because Leona obviously is the one that's the prized possession. You want the Leona on your board, but if you don't hit her, you know, other things can help you out. Of course, you can later pivot. I wouldn't waste gold if I'm in a good spot. Like if I have a lot of HP, I might not choose to buy Poppy because instead I'll just keep my gold and make interest and then maybe like, you know, hopefully hit the Cassante a little bit later. It's really spot dependent, but it's just something to keep in mind. That's what I mean by buy all viable 4 costs. Additionally, if you're trying to flex between 2 units, you know, you would then also buy your Karmas and your Jarvins because maybe you're playing Sorks, right? If you are playing around Yumi, for example, but you didn't make Archangels, right? You did what I said and you made JG, right? Then, you know, you're not only looking for Leona Yumi, you might want to buy Jarvan Karma. And then depending on whichever one you hit first, if you hit the Karma first, okay, I'm just Sorks, and then you just play around the Karma board instead. That's what I mean by buying all viable things. Anything that's in your plan A or your plan B, you can then use in order to structure your board. Of course, you want to play your strongest board at this point. Make sure that you're not losing any more rounds unless you have to. And then big part is that you want to rebuild your econ. Now, like I said before, if you're losing the game, if you're low HP, continue to roll, right? Roll if you're losing the game. Make sure that you hit something. Even if it's Hopium, try and hit something. But a lot of times, you usually just try and rebuild your econ, and you roll if you have unit pairs. What do I mean by that? So a lot of times, you'll roll down and maybe you'll hit like 1 copy of Yumi. Well, it's not easy for you to like hit like you have to hit 2 more copies of Yumi. So, you know, if you rolled 50 gold and you only saw 1 Yuumi, what are the odds that in the remaining 5 gold that you have, you're going to see 2 more Yuumis? You won't even be able to buy them. You don't have enough gold for that, right? So a lot of times what helps out is if you only have like 1 unit, you then just wait. You just kind of sit and you're like, okay, I'll figure out what to do later. I'll rebuild my Econ, because with the Econ, I generate gold per round. It'll give me more gold to eventually try and hit my final board. Obviously, this doesn't apply if you're low HP. Hit what you can. Additionally, if you have like a Yuumi, let's say you have a Yuumi on bench, right? Let's say this is your board. Let me do it. I like doing it like this because it looks cool, right? Check this out. Whoa, production value. Anyways, let's say you have a Yuumi over here, and then the squiggly line, you have a Yuumi over here that's on your bench. Now, this is what I would call a unit pair, right? Obviously, it's a pair. There's 2 units. Here, you're a lot more incentivized to roll because you spike really hard off hitting the 2-star Yuumi, and you're only 1 off. So a lot of times, you want to roll if you have unit pairs. Now, if you have 1 pair, it's debatable whether you roll. But the more pairs that you have, the more justification you have for rolling. For example, let's say your board looks something like this, and your bench looks something like this, right? Here, I would roll to 0 every single turn, no matter what my spot is. Why? Because I'm paired on so many units, every single one of my rolls is very efficient. It's very efficient because there's a good chance that I'll hit something to upgrade. The more unit pairs you have, the more incentivized you are to roll. Don't look at this and say, oh, you know what? We're going fast 9, easy clap. We're gonna roll on level 9. It's like, no, you have 3 unit pairs. Roll for 1 of these at least, right? That's what I mean, right? When you have unit pairs, it usually is a good indicator to roll. If you don't have unit pairs, then you kind of have to sit there and you have to think about it. It's like, do I have enough HP to just sit here and do nothing? If you have enough HP to sit there and do nothing, then sit there and try and rebuild your Econ so you have a better chance of rolling. If you're contested or if you're low HP, roll, because you want to hit your unit upgrades before like the game is over and then you just lose. Ideally, you want to be stable. Of course, if you're not stable and you're bleeding out HP, roll a little bit more. Really important. Usually after your stage 4, we finally get to stage 5. Stage 5 is kind of where most of the game kind of decides itself. It's very rare that like placements are going to sway much more past stage 5, but usually on stage 5, that's when you're fighting the up until when you're fighting the dragon. This is where you really want to find all your upgrades. So if you were greeding, if you didn't have unit pairs, this is where you decide if you roll all your gold down, hit your upgrades on level 8, or if it's worth it to go level 9. It really depends on the comp. Some comps spike really hard on level 9, some comps don't. So it really matters on what you need to hit and what your board is. For example, something like this board, it might not really spike that hard on level 9 because like you fit everything on level 8 anyways. Of course, hitting a Gwen 2 is going to be really strong, and of course, getting a Braum is really strong on level 9, but if you don't have the upgrades for this board, if you don't have the Karma 2, the Jarvan 2, or like Rise is kind of unimportant, but like if you don't have the upgrades that you need for this comp, a lot of times you're more incentivized to just roll, guarantee your placement because the comp is already really strong as it is. Something like Yuumi is a little bit more difficult. Ooh, I think I messed up my Yuumi board. Oh, here it is. Right, Yuumi, a lot of times like leveling is really important because to fit in this 5 prodigy with a stable front line as follows, you need to be level 9. So a lot of times this is where a big decision comes into play. Am I stable enough? Do I have enough HP to make it to level 9? Or do I just roll and I'll accept my placements and then I'll eventually make it to 9 a little bit later? This is usually where you make the decisions. It's always on stage 5. So that's why a lot of times when people ask me like, hey, should I just go level 9? It's really dependent on your spot, right? If you have your upgrades, if you're stable, if you have HP, go level 9. If any of those things that I said don't apply or aren't true to you, you gotta roll. You gotta make sure you get your top 4 at least. Obviously, when you're at this point, you can play for placements, and then if you can win, that's when you can try and greed, right? That's what usually when it's like you look around, it's like, oh, I might be able to win. I'll hold on to my gold, make sure I hit the highest cap version I can by using as much Econ or maximizing my Econ as much as possible. Like I said before, roll hard if you're likely to bot 4, and like I said, you want to be minimum 2 lives at all points. 1 life. If you're 1 life, fix your board. When I say minimum 2 lives, that's like around 20 HP. What I mean by that is like every single stage, you take a certain amount of damage based on how many units your opponent kills you by, like in excess. So like if they have 3 surviving units, you take 3 damage. But then there's also a base value that you get for your board. For example, on stage 5, the base damage is 11. So, you know, if you have 20 HP and you lose a round on stage 5, that's around 2 lives, because, you know, usually they're going to have 8 units on their board or 9. Unless you don't kill a single unit, you're probably going to be alive. But usually 2 lives are around 20 HP. You want to be 2 lives because there's a lot of RNG and TFT. I'm sure you've had this experience. You play a game and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm probably going to beat that guy. And then some unit walks like a fucking dumbass the wrong way, and then the other unit walks the other way, and then the other unit walks the other way, and then you just lose the game because it's like, oh great, like that shouldn't have happened, but it just happened because I didn't expect all these things to go wrong, like a pile of cards falling down, right? That's why I always say be 2 lives, right? If you're not 2 lives, you're rolling 0 almost every single turn. You're making sure you play the maximum strongest board, upgrade everything, and only when everything is upgraded, you hit every single unit, then you can maybe greed your econ because you have nothing else to spend your gold on. But that's usually what happens, right? You want to make sure that you have like 1 life of wiggle room just in case something goes wrong, obviously, so that you don't just like go 8th for no reason. Even though you have a strong board, you want to have to mitigate that RNG a little bit. Give yourself reaction time. Of course, pivot options I usually do in this guide. I talked a little bit about it before, and I made it like a little bit more at the beginning when I was talking about flexibility. But pivoting follows the same thing. I will do this later. Right now, the comps that are strong are really strong, so a lot of times you just play the comps that are strong. If you're trying to rank up, I talk about a lot in my other guide videos, so you can check those out if you want to know some comps you can try out to rank up and things like that. But typically with pivoting, just in case you're like a person who likes to pivot, only pivot if it can improve your placements, right? If your units and your items make sense. Don't pivot just because you're scared that somebody else is going to be playing the same comp, because like a lot of times if you pivot, you end up getting a worse placement sometimes because like, you know, your comp is just weaker, and by you pivoting, you let the other person who's playing the strong comp hit the strong units. So now you're getting double whammied. It's like not only are you playing a weaker comp, you're also making sure that the other people that are playing the strong comp are getting an easier time playing the strong comp. So now you're getting destroyed, and that's what happens sometimes. So be careful about it. Only pivot if it improves your placement, right? If there's a lot of people contesting the same comp, let's say there's like 3+ Sork players, you know they're not all gonna hit, and if they do, it's just like, you know, that's a act of nature, as they call it in insurance companies, right? Like, you know, it just is what it is. Or sorry, act of God or whatever. So, you know, if that happens, if things go wrong, it is what it is. But like in those cases, it's like, yeah, obviously, I'm not saying not to pivot. I'm saying like, you know, make sure that when you're pivoting, it's actually to improve your placement, not just because of just wanting to be uncontested. But anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully that was informative and fun. I tried to make it as animated as possible because obviously there's a lot of talking, a lot of slides with knowledge because I'm kind of outlining all the intervals and stuff like that. Hopefully there's some useful tips. Like I said before, if you're looking for gameplay, VOD channel, if you're looking for more guides, this channel. Thanks for watching. Have a great day and see ya. Bye-bye.